Hello, I'm Lori Marks. In part 2 of this workshop, I'll provide a review of the essays in the reading set with advice about how to employ those essays. If you're looking for advice on writing a passing essay, please watch part 1 of the workshop. I'm going to start with some general information about what's coming up from the Writing Proficiency Office. You can drop in for last-minute help on March 14 and 15. Then we're holding draft reviews March 16 and 17. For the draft reviews, you just have to schedule an appointment, but it doesn't matter what time the appointment is. You're scheduling a half hour of staff time, and you just need to send us your draft before that appointment time. During the half hour that you've scheduled, we'll review your draft and then we'll send you feedback by email. So you're not actually going to meet with anybody. Finally, just to let you know, the office will be open during spring break, and you can contact us by phone or email with any problems or questions. In this talk, I'm primarily going to focus on how these readings are relevant to your project, rather than trying to tell you what each essay in the reading set is saying. That would be impossible for me to do in the hour or so that I have to talk with you. I'll follow this review with a more detailed discussion of the more difficult passages in the reading set. First, when you work with sources, you need to understand the author's credentials, what the material is that you're working with, and what audience it is intended for. These are important basic pieces of information that will help you to understand how to read and what to expect. So I'll tell you a little bit about each author and the publication. First, David Eagleman is a neuroscientist and a professor at Stanford University. He wrote and published and presented a PBS series on the brain, and he's the author of 6 books and more than 100 articles. This 2009 article that we're using here, titled Brain Time, was written for an online journal called Edge. That journal's mission is to represent the frontiers of knowledge in the areas of evolutionary biology, genetics, computer science, neurophysiology, psychology, and physics. However, it's not necessarily just for people who are doing scientific research. Instead, the goal is to communicate across disciplines about the breakthroughs on these topics. Therefore, someone like you or me should be able to read and understand these essays. Second is Eva Hoffman's essay titled Time in Our Time. Eva Hoffman is a writer, editor, and professor of literature and creative writing. She has published 8 books of fiction and nonfiction and numerous articles. Time in Our Time is a selection from Hoffman's book titled Time, in which she grapples with the question of how we find meaning in that which doesn't last. In other words, we live in the present moment, and the present moment lasts, well, according to the next essayist, about 3 seconds. So how do we find meaning in that short space of time? Her book is one of a series of books by different authors. The publisher says about that series that it is a series of powerful, compact volumes designed to shatter conventional thinking on our most fundamental concerns. Again, this essay is targeted towards Intelligent, somewhat educated people, but you don't have to be a specialist in any particular field to understand it. Our third essayist, Mark Whitman, is currently employed at the Institute for Frontier Areas of Psychology and Mental Health in Freiburg, Germany. This essay is a translation of an essay that was originally written in his native language of German. Whitman's essay and research focuses on time perception as an indicator of cognitive functioning and emotion. Whitman has published more than 100 essays based in his research. Although he primarily works to report his discoveries to his fellow researchers, our section is from a 2016 book he wrote on the perception of time, which is intended for a more general audience rather than just for his fellow researchers. Therefore, you can see that all three pieces in the reading set are intended to be read by interested, possibly educated people, but they're not intended to be read only by academics. It may take some work for you to read and understand these essays. You may have to look up a few terms or concepts, and you might have to spend a little more time on understanding the sentences, but these readings should be within your ability to understand them. We're going to start with a quick review of each essay. I'll talk about them in the order that they appear in the reading set, but you may use them in any order you wish, and I encourage you to discuss 2 or 3 of them in the same paragraph, because their essays do overlap with each other. Also, I'll give you some quotations from the readings as examples of how the readings could be relevant to answering the prompt in your essay. But there are many ways these essays could be deployed in your argument, and you should not limit yourself to the few examples that I'm going to discuss here in this reading, in this discussion of the reading set. After I discuss this topic, I'll discuss a difficult passage from each essay. Remember, your essay is to be written on this topic, considering the ways that we humans experience time. What is the relevance and importance of our ability to synchronize, integrate, and reflect upon the moments of our lives? Eagleman is a neurologist, and neurologists sometimes describe themselves as brain mechanics. They're interested in the mechanisms by which our brains operate. In this essay, Brain Time, Eagleman's examining the mechanisms behind our perception of time, in particular in how our brains put together and combine the information that comes in from our various senses. These mechanisms can cause various illusions related to our time perception, including the experience of being in slow motion during a life-endangering experience such as an accident. On page 4, Eagleman states the problem he's investigating in his essay. He writes, because different types of sensory information, hearing, seeing, touch, and so on, are processed at different speeds by different neural architectures, your brain faces an enormous challenge. What is the best story that can be constructed about the outside world? Eagleman argues that our perception of when things happen and how events are connected is the result of a lot of hard work. We're just simply not aware of the work that our brain is doing to put these different sources of information together into one unified perception. Eagleman's essay is about the brain mechanisms around our perception of time. So he explains how we experience time, how we synchronize, and how we integrate. I've given you a quotation here for each of these topics, but he actually says a lot more than is represented on this screen. Regarding how we experience time, he says, your brain goes through a good deal of trouble to perceptually synchronize incoming signals that were synchronized in the outside world. This is page 8. In other words, the sound, sight, and sensation that occur in the outside world are put into the same sequence in the mental world. And if they are simultaneous in the outside world, the brain makes them simultaneous internally as well, even though the information from different senses moves at different speeds. Regarding how we synchronize, Eagleman claims, a unified polysensory perception of the world has to wait for the slowest overall information. Page 7. In other words, our brain holds off on putting the information from the different senses together into a perception until the slowest information arrives. As for how we integrate, he writes, causality requires a temporal order judgment. Did my motor act come before or after that sensory signal? The only way this problem can be accurately solved in a multisensory brain is by keeping the expected time of signals well calibrated so that before and after can be accurately determined even in the face of different sensory pathways of different speeds. This word causality in the quotation means cause and effect. So he's saying that in order to know what caused what, we need to know in what order they happened. Did I kick the ball or did someone throw the ball at my foot? I know the answer because I know that my foot moved first and then the ball moved. Therefore, that must mean I kicked the ball. Here's a passage, a difficult passage from Eagleman's essay that I'm going to discuss. As I mentioned before, for each essay, I'm going to discuss one or two passages which I think are important for you to understand, but which are probably a little difficult. I can't explain the entire reading set to you, but I hope that if you can find your way through these most difficult passages, the rest of them will become more clear to you as well. So this passage from Eagleman may feel intimidating because Eagleman's explanation of how the brain puts together pieces of information that occur simultaneously but arrive in the brain at slightly different times is kind of intimidating. It's a strange way to think about how our brain works. So neurologists, they talk about the brain in ways that most of us find peculiar because they aren't really interested in what it feels like. They're interested in what's actually happening. So he explains that the brain seems to wait for the slowest information before it puts the pieces together and presents that event as a perception to our conscious mind. I'll read you this passage from page 7. This brief waiting period allows the visual system to discount the various delays imposed by the early stages. However, it has the disadvantage of pushing perception into the past. There is a distinct survival advantage to operating as close to the present as possible. An animal does not want to live too far in the past. This window of delay means that awareness is postdictive, incorporating data from a window of time after an event and delivering a retrospective interpretation of what happened. Also, I've given you the author's note. We introduced the term postdiction in 2000 to describe the brain's act of collecting information well after an event and then settling on a perception. In the first part of this quotation, Eagleman refers to a brief waiting period. This is the time that the brain waits before putting together the information from our different senses. The brain has to wait because some sensory information moves faster. For example, hearing is faster than vision. So if there's a simultaneous bang and flash of light, the brain knows about the sound before it knows about the flash of light, but it will wait for the flash to arrive and then will connect them together and present them as a thing that happened simultaneously. However, Eagleman says there is a disadvantage to this delay because even a small delay could mean death. If we were wandering in the jungle, for instance, we don't want to live too far in the past. If I were being stalked by a tiger, I would want to know about it as soon as possible. So we have some reflexes that protect us to a degree. Eagleman uses this term postdictive, which he made up. Postdiction is a perception of a past event. What he's saying is that our brains figure out a perception after it's done collecting the information. So we understand something a few microseconds after it actually happens. That means we're always living a tiny, tiny bit in the past. Things that seem simultaneous to us actually happened a very short amount of time before we perceive them. Remember, I told you neurologists think about the brain in rather peculiar ways. Now let's switch our attention to Eva Hoffman and her essay, Time in Our Time. Hoffman's interest in the subject of time is cultural rather than mechanical. In this selection, she focuses on something she calls fast time, which is the speed of our modern digital age. She acknowledges the appeal and benefits of fast time, but she is primarily concerned about the negatives and their effect on our social values and our personal understanding. She states her purpose on page 10. Quote, both in the social realm and on the individual level, fast time has many unintended and much less beneficial consequences. Her point is that the impact of fast time is largely negative because it is depriving us of personal depth and self-understanding and depriving our society of the ability to make considered, thoughtful, economic and political decisions. So she thinks fast time is generally not a good thing. Remember, you're writing your essay on this topic. Considering the ways that we humans experience time, what is the relevance and importance of our ability to synchronize, integrate, and reflect upon the moments of our lives? Hoffman's ideas can help us to think about how time is important to our ability to reflect upon the moments of our lives. We can think about this by agreeing with her argument or by disagreeing with it, or both. Also, Hoffman discusses why it is important that we be able to engage in this reflection. Regarding fast time, she writes, in this perpetually created and perpetually vanishing present, there is no time to take stock, to consider relationships between occurrences or link into the longer and deeper time of history. This is from page 10. This lack of time to assess, make connections, and consider the implications of events is a grave loss, according to Hoffman. She explains why, and you're free to add on to or disagree with her argument. Hoffman also discusses in detail the importance of being able to reflect upon our lives. On page 11, she writes, if we want to make sense of our own affective, which is emotional, experience, we also need to dip inwards and travel through our subjectivity to work through the content of our feelings and let them sift through strata of the self, to weave disparate episodes of our lives and interpret and reinterpret their meaning. She's making a very condensed statement here, but it's worth your while to really think about and respond to each of her phrases, because each of them could be a launching point for your own writing. She's implying that it's our job as humans to understand ourselves and our emotional experiences. To do this, we need to do some hard thinking about what we feel, why we feel it, who we are, what is the story of our life, and how we understand ourselves. This is an ongoing process because each new understanding may cause us to understand our past experiences differently. To go through this process is one of the values of slow time as opposed to fast time. This slow thinking and self-assessment is what leads to increasing maturity and wisdom. And by the way, this concept is one of the ways, I think one of the important ways that Hoffman's essay overlaps with Whitman's essay, which is the next one we're going to talk about. But first, I'd like to talk about a difficult passage from Hoffman. Here's the passage from page 12. By transposing aspects of thought and memory to technology, we are externalizing our mental operations. But both the mind and the psyche require internality. In order to reflect upon a problem or build an argument, we need to turn mental attention inwards, to mull over ideas and let the mind wander, to sift the important from the trivial, to follow thoughts in their course and consider the disjunctions and connections between them. If the occurrence of a single thought happens in measurable time, then the development of ideas or the elaboration of a creative impulse or self-examination all happen in more extended durations and need more persistent concentration. Acts of mind require us, at least occasionally, to be unplugged. In the first sentence here, she says that we're shifting some of our brain's operations to technology, specifically our thinking and memory operations, which before we had computers really depended upon whatever we could do within our own mind. She says that by shifting this thinking to the computer, we're moving our internal mental work to the outside and making it external. This is a problem, she says, because in order to really figure out and really understand things, we need to work on them internally over time. And this is work that the external systems of the computers can't do. She says that we need to consider things and make connections, examine implications, and assess the value of new information or ideas. If we are relying on external machines, such as computers, to manage our ideas and memories, she thinks that our ability to engage in thinking that requires a lot of time and concentration will suffer. Therefore, we need to be unplugged, as she puts it, at least some of the time, to engage in this demanding work. I imagine that she's afraid that if we humans don't engage in this slow, time-consuming type of thinking, we'll make bad decisions. We won't grow emotionally and intellectually, and we won't understand each other. An entire society of such people would be very different from what we have now. And she implies, and I kind of agree with her, it wouldn't be that great. Now I'm going to talk about Mark Whitman. By the way, spelling his name is a real trick because it has two T's and two N's, and you really have to deliberately force yourself to do it. Also, there is no H. So his name is spelled in the German way and not in the American way. As a psychologist, Whitman is interested in our subjective experiences. In this essay, he focuses on the subjective experience of time, particularly our experience of the present moment. He declares this interest early in his essay when he asks his inquiry questions. This is on page 14. What does it mean to concentrate on the moment? What do we mean when we speak of the present moment, the instant, or the now? His essay will be useful to help you to answer every aspect of the prompt. One last reminder that your topic is this. Considering the ways that we humans experience time, what is the relevance and importance of our ability to synchronize, integrate, and reflect upon the moments of our lives? Whitman's focus is on the moments of our lives. What constitutes the present moment? Why is it important? And how do we experience it? He argues that the present moment lasts about 3 seconds, which is the typical duration of a breath and utterance in a conversation and a phrase of poetry or music. This rather long quotation from page 16 shows how these 3-second moments add up to something of great significance. This moment, as the temporal building block of perception and action, does not last long enough for us to understand ourselves as agents in a complex world. This is where short-term or working memory comes into play, linking several of these moments identified on an elementary level into a greater whole. On a level higher than our experience of the moment, we constantly experience duration, which includes a point of origin and the potential for actions in the future. The feeling of an enduring self with a personal history and the capacity to influence the future defines us as persons. He's saying that in every moment we are aware of the immediate past and the anticipated future, which allows us to perceive and to take action. These moments link together to form working memory, and those memories add up to allow us to have a self, a person with a history and a capacity to influence the future. Whitman's discussion intersects with Hoffman's in some interesting ways, and I encourage you to seek out those connections as they can be very helpful to your own thinking. Also, his essay explains some other aspects of how our brains work, but with more of an emphasis on experience than Eagleman's essay has. So his essay and Eagleman's can connect to each other as well. If you're able to identify some of these points of connection in your own essay, the WPE graders will be impressed. Here's a difficult passage from Whitman. The temporality of the present, which lasts up to a maximum of 3 seconds, represents the building block of our experience of time. When we say we are living from one moment to the next, we are referring to short intervals of life. Now, now, now. In other words, we sense that our life and experience occur in a moving frame of nowness that has a particular duration. For all that, this moment, as the temporal building block of perception and action, does not last long enough for us to understand ourselves as agents in a complex world. This feeling of presence, that we are beings acting in the world, cannot be reduced to a span of 3 seconds. This is where short-term or working memory come into play, linking several of these moments identified on an elementary level into a greater whole. When writers try to depict stream of consciousness linguistically, say a character's impressions, memories, and wishes, the matter cannot be treated fully in windows lasting only 3 seconds. The stream of consciousness is composed of elementary units of the feeling of now. However, the unity of our experience as actors in the world stretches beyond this limit. He points out here that sometimes we may feel like we are living in each moment, but without any sense of the past or future. Nevertheless, he says, the moment is the temporal building block of perception and action. In order for this to be possible, we need a way to keep those individual moments connected to each other. So we have a thing called working memory, in which some of these moments are linked together. This mechanism allows us to have a unity of experience because we remember the previous moments and connect them to the moment we're experiencing right now. In the next paragraph, he goes on to explain how those working memories connect together to form our narrative self. This is our idea of ourself as a person who has led a unified life. So, in his essay and in this paragraph, he's making connections between the present moment, that is the 3 seconds of the present moment, and working memory, which is our ability to remember the previous moment and the one that we're in currently, which is therefore connecting those pieces of present, of now, 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 into a more complex whole. And if we have that working memory, then in turn, we're able to connect it to the big picture. So we have unity of experience. We believe that we exist in the present moment and that we existed in the past and that we will exist in the future. And if we have this sense of ourselves as living in time, that's what makes it possible to us to view our life as having unity and to believe that we are actors in the world. We can take action that will affect our own future and the future of the world. So I do recommend that you read these essays at least twice, take notes, and mark significant passages. For many people, reading comprehension is better if you work on a paper copy of the readings rather than reading them on screen. Finally, if anything is puzzling or baffling you, you can contact us at the Writing Proficiency Office by email or by phone call, and we will do our best to help you.